Hello and welcome to Business Africa. I'm Amelga. Coming up today, African countries called upon to go beyond political promises for the implementation of intra-African trade, which still faces lack of infrastructure and financing. Nigeria announces the entry into service of a new gas pipeline in the second quarter of 2019. And in Zimbabwe, we discover a shoe factory that is resisting closure despite the current economic crisis. This is a major challenge for African states which are still struggling to make trade between different countries effective. In addition to non-tariff barriers and the lack of financing, infrastructure problems are majorly hampering intra-African trade. And to build quality infrastructure, the continent needs at least $300 billion by 2020. Details with Ruth Lago and Hawao Sulemana.
Trade between African states is still struggling to take off. Despite a slight increase estimated at more than 5.6% in 2017, intra-African trade transactions remain very low and below expectations. 15% according to the latest figures of the continent's total trade volume. This poor performance is due to the lack of transnational infrastructure, including roads. A real obstacle, according to the Economic Commission for Africa, in facilitating intra-regional trade, economic development and continental transformation. Yet, the continent needs at least $300 billion by 2020 to build quality roads infrastructure. With quality communication infrastructures, the continent can develop several sectors, including hydrocarbons, fertilizers and agriculture, among others. Intra-African trade is a factor that can protect the continent from external economic shocks, according to a report by the African Import and Export Bank. The organization has announced an investment of $85 billion targeted at implementing several initiatives that will boost trade on the continent.
On to Douala, Cameroon's economic capital, where we meet Germain Salah, the director of the Raw Materials Institute and an expert in international trade. Hello, Salah, and welcome to Business Africa.
Hello, and thank you for the invitation.
In addition to infrastructure problems, what other challenges does trade between African states face?
Thank you for this question. Obviously, we can think that the infrastructure issue may be the only challenge, but I think that beyond the infrastructure issue, there are other challenges facing trade between African states. The question related to productivity, because when we talk about trade, there are sales operations. So we must review from top to the bottom industrialization of African countries. Apart from that, we can also highlight the questions of how this intra-African trade is organized. Now we can note the implementation of the Treaty of the African Economic Integration Zone. We can note that this is an opportunity, and we will see how the implementation will be done, and then we will know if it will be an accelerated factor for the development of this trade. We can also identify the issue of national selfishness. In addition to this, we can also identify issues of insecurity. There are also issues related to financing of this trade. So you have a number of challenges there. This is infrastructure African trade. Yes, the question of infrastructure, but these other issues must be integrated.
Can interconnection help to solve a large part of this problem?
So, I think this is very understandable. The first thing to remember is that if you want to focus on the banks that operate on the African continent, a good part of these banks are subsidiaries or branches of multinationals. However, these banks have logistics, strategic choices, or development plans that do not necessarily correspond to the needs of our states. So you will see that sometimes it is banks that do not provide very long-term financing or long-term financing. However, for the development of the country, and if we look at this case of Africa, the need in terms of infrastructure, we therefore believe that we need long-term financing. That is very long-term financing. That is why you see that even the banking system must also be reviewed so that we have banks that are not only more concerned with development of state, but also specialized banks. For example, we do not have enough banks specialized in international trade, but it must also be said that banks are also investors, so they will also invest where they feel they can have return. So you see the problem. If we also look at the country risk in a number of African countries, which is often very high, it is not very easy for investors to be able to put their money into it. So all this problem must also be addressed in order to further develop trade between African countries.
Can the announcement of $85 billion investments by Afreximbank to implement several initiatives accelerate initiatives of this kind with about $300 billion required by 2020 to fill the infrastructure gap?
So you already noticed that between what Afreximbank offers and the needs you see, the gap is huge. It is a solution, but it cannot also further boost development. It is not a trade at all. Now, we also need to look at what types of initiatives will be financed, what type of initiatives. Are these initiatives that we really integrate or interest commercial activities, or that we directly contribute to development of intra-African trade? The effect will not be as much as we think it will be because the needs are huge. So we have to put in the measurement mechanism to attract investors. And there is a set of challenges that our states have to face. So you see that we have to take the whole things effectively and not in a gradual way.
Thank you, Germain, for the insights. Germain Salah is the director of the Raw Materials Institute and an expert in international trade. He joined us online from Douala in Cameroon.
Thank you very much.
Increasing Nigeria's economy is one of President Muhammadu Buhari's main election campaign promises. To this end, the government has embarked on a series of reforms, including the development of made-in-Nigerian products. It announced a second gas pipeline with a capacity of 2 billion cubic feet per day will be commissioned in the second quarter of this year to boost the country's domestic gas supply. Nyasha Mutizwa and Cedric Seosolo tell us more.
This is one of the projects that Nigeria plans to use to boost its economy this year. In addition to exporting made-in-Nigeria products, which could generate $30 billion in annual revenue, the government wants to stimulate domestic gas supply. The construction of the new OB3 gas pipeline of the public oil company, NNPC, will start operating in the second quarter of the year. One of its objectives is to meet and satisfy the population's internal demand for gas. The line, with a capacity of 2 billion cubic feet per day, will transport gas extracted in the Niger Delta to thermal power plants in the region for increased power generation. The project is part of a government program to build 7 major gas projects by 2020. It will increase the domestic gas supply plateau to 5 billion cubic feet per day from the current 1.7 billion. In January 2016, nearly 95 million Nigerians still had no access to electricity, according to the newspaper Libre Afrique. The country had an installed capacity of 10,396 milliwatts, divided into 23 power plants for a power rate of 45%. According to economists, an increase in Nigeria's energy supply would reduce corporate losses by 40%, resulting in a 3% increase in GDP.
Will the Kudni shoe factory withstand the current economic crisis in Zimbabwe? Get the answer to this question after the break.